Greetings everyone, this is Zakhele here from the FMF, and today we'll be talking about inflation. And I'm sure we all have a general understanding of what inflation is. An increase in prices, but not a specific increase in prices to your favorite good or service that you like purchasing, right? But a general increase in prices whereby everything in the economy tends to increase in price. Now, I think we can have a basic understanding that inflation is bad. Why? Because, if something increases in price, I have less, and my disposable income or my income in general remains the same. Heck, even if my income increases too, right, I don't think that would appreciate the prospect of having to pay more for things, even though we're still getting the same quantity and quality of thing, but it will cost us more. So why is this the case, right? Inflation is generally caused when you have more money chasing less goods in the market. So the institution responsible for creating or printing money in our constitutional democracy is the South African Reserve Bank. So to give a rudimentary example is, if the amount of rands we have in the South African economy exceeds the amount of goods and services that can be bought with those rands in the South African economy, that will mean that the price of those goods and services relative to the amount of money that we have to purchase them will increase. Now, of course, the value of those prices and goods does not increase, as I mentioned earlier. I'm sure anyone who has, experienced inflationary pressures, if so, will tell you that, a Streetwise 2 in 2005 is still the same two-piece and a side of chips in 2024, but the cost of it has risen astronomically, right? Now, of course, I'm sure income levels have also tried to keep up with the inflation rate, but in most cases, it doesn't always be the case, right? And this opens us, those who propagate for free markets, for attacks from the left, from people who say that, we propagate for people to not earn a living wage when we are against, for instance, the public sector instituting above inflation raises. But the other side of it is that, hopefully they watch this video and they see how opposed we are to the very idea of inflation, right? So inflation, in my estimation, is unjust. As I just mentioned, when we have this money chasing less goods than it can actually acquire, then the price of those goods increases. So, there's still an operation of the basic law of demand and supply there, which I think is always something nice to mention, right, to show the everlasting nature of economic laws. But either way, the South African Reserve Bank are the ones who are responsible for printing our currency in the country. The more currency they print, the more of the actual overall currency will be chasing these goods and services that we have. Now, the problem comes in, as I mentioned, if those goods and services do not equal the amount of currency that is printed. And that has been the case if you were to look at the actual economic data. Ever since the Reserve Bank was instituted, right, they have been increasing the money supply. So that's what it's called. When the money supply in a particular country is increased whilst the goods and services that particular country aren't a match, for lack of a better term, that particular money supply, you have inflation. Inflation is normalized everywhere, but it is unjust, particularly in South Africa, right? As I said, the Reserve Bank is responsible for our currency distribution. Simultaneously, it is governed by the Constitution, and the Constitution is clear on the duties of the Reserve Bank. The Reserve Bank must protect the value of the rand. Now, I have written multiple articles about this, posing the question that if you have monetary expansion as the norm, which is the norm across not only our Reserve Bank or central bank, but across every other central bank, in the world. When you have this as the norm, when you have the idea that we will have more money chasing less goods, this is normalized, this is what will happen. Is that in line with the constitutional imperative of protecting the value of the rand? Because our constitution was pretty clear on that this is the main duty of the Reserve Bank, to protect the value of the South African constitution. And by nature, when it institutes monetary expansion, which leads to inflation, right? Because, when something costs more whilst it still is the same, then it means that the purchasing power of your money has decreased, right? Because you can no longer get the same amount of goods that you did with the same amount of money at a particular point in time. So when that happens, can we say that the Reserve Bank is meeting its constitutional mandate of protecting this value of the rand when it is being undermined by inflation? Now I leave the question up to you. But either way, the main point we are making here is that inflation is caused by our central bank in doing something that, in my estimation, I think is a violation of the Constitution. But beyond that, right, even if there was no constitutional imperative, as a matter of justice, no institution should be allowed to cause an increase in general prices for everyone in the economy, right? And we all know the effects of inflation on, you know, as I mentioned, you have less money to spend because the purchasing power of your money is eroded. Therefore, your quality of life and standard of life will decrease in most cases than not. The most glaring example of how horrible inflation can be is in our neighbors in Zimbabwe, right? They have the textbook case of hyperinflation when their central bank printed a lot of money, so much so that their inflation levels rose above, you know, I think at some point 500%, close to, you know, 1,000%. Like, this is on a month-to-month basis, and they are still suffering the effects of that policy from their central bank, right? They have tried everything except maybe closing down their central bank, which is, you know, my solution to everything. But as I said, please tell us what you think. Do you think inflation is a good thing? I know there's a school of thought in economics that, you know, welcomes inflation. Maybe you're of that idea. Please share your thoughts. Or maybe you agree with me that, you know, we should be rid of every central bank across the world, or at the very least rein them in with their expansionary policies. Please let us know, and as always, remember, stay free.